Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be in the latter part of Hebrews chapter 6. Before we go there, though, I would like to talk to you a little bit about assurances, security, hope. When I was working at Microsoft many years ago, there was a few things that gave us a lot of security. One of them was that the company had never had layoffs. They had never laid off a number of people. You could lose your job if you made a big mistake, if you didn't do something you were supposed to do, or if you did something ethically or against the rules, you could actually be fired from your job. But otherwise, you were pretty much assured a position. Even if they had to relocate you, if one job went away, they would give you another job in another team. That gave you a lot of assurance, a lot of security in knowing that you had a job. Other places would have layoffs. Sometimes yearly, they would lay off part of their crew and then hire them back when they got busy again. Companies like Boeing was very much known for that habit of hiring and laying off. But Microsoft did not do that. They never had that policy. It was always, if you do your job, you have a job. Until one day they came to my team and eliminated 40% of the team in the same day. All of a sudden, that secure feeling, that hope of having a job was gone. You didn't know whether the next day you might be the next team to be let go. That shattered that security that we had in that job. The reason I bring this up and mentioning it is because here in the chapter 6 of Hebrews, the writer is trying to get us to understand that God is our security, that we don't have to have a fear of what tomorrow might bring, because our anchor will hold. It will not give way. He begins by explaining to us in verse 13 that when God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. In Genesis chapter 22 and verse 16, God is speaking to Abraham and he's making a promise to him. And he says, I swear by myself. Why would he do something like that? In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is speaking to those who are listening there on the Mount, and he's expressing to them that they do not need to swear by the temple or by the throne of God or by heaven or by earth. Don't swear by anything. Simply let your yes be yes and your no, no. What he was trying to get them to understand was that if you make oaths on other things, that does not make your word any better. Simply make your yes, yes, and your no, no. But what the writer here in Hebrews is referring to is that God, not having anyone above him or greater than him, swore upon himself to fulfill the promise that he made to Abraham. And he does just that. He fulfilled the promise to populate the world with the children that he would provide to the world. He makes that promise here in verse 13. And he says that in verse 14, saying, I will surely bless you and give you many descendants. And so after waiting patiently, Abraham received what was promised. There's a couple of things that are really important here. God, when he makes a promise, will never break that promise. He didn't need to swear by himself. He did that for our benefit, to let us know that he was serious, that this is something that he was definitely going to fulfill. And by doing that, by swearing by himself, he made a promise that he would never change, that he would multiply Abraham's descendants and make them a great nation. He did that, and he did it even beyond what he had promised. The idea here in Hebrews chapter 6 is that the promise that was being made required patience. I can imagine that Abraham probably thought more than once God must have changed his mind. Maybe this was something that he wanted to do, but he just couldn't do it, or whatever else he might have thought. But when they finally had Isaac, when they finally had the son that God had promised, maybe then he started to have hope. But then God tells him, I want you to take this son and I want you to sacrifice him to me. And Abraham, in faith, goes up to the mountain with his son Isaac, carrying the wood, carrying the fire, but no sacrifice. Because God had asked him to give his one and only son. But then he stopped him and he says to him, Abraham, you, because of your faith, have shown me that you trust me, that you put your security in me. And because of that, I am going to bless you. And I swear by my own name, God said, that I will produce for you many nations. So in verse 19, he goes on, men swear by someone greater than themselves, and the oath confirms that it is what is said and puts an end to all arguments, because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised. He confirmed it with an oath. I don't know if you remember doing this when you were a child or maybe a younger person. You may have said something like, cross my heart and hope to die if I don't do what I say I'm going to do. Or maybe to make an oath on something else, to say, if I don't do this, may something help happen or whatever. Those oaths that we made were to convince the person we are talking to that I'm serious, that I'm going to do this. In real estate, they call it an earnest money. When you put up money and a token of, I am promising to do what I say I'm going to do, or I will lose this money. There's a lot of different examples throughout our government and our history of how these oaths become a part of our culture and part of what we do today. But here, the writer of Hebrews is trying to express to us that God is using an oath on his name because there is no one greater than him to provide a promise for you and me. What is that promise? What is it that he wants us to put our hope in? Well, he goes on in verse 17, because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised. He confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope offered to us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain. The hope that we have is in Jesus Christ. He is the one that entered behind the curtain. As we have spoke of in the last few weeks, this Holy of Holies was only entered by the high priest. The high priest only once a year would enter this Holy of Holies, because that's where you would commune with God. That high priest was our representative to God. And so he would enter into the Holy of Holies once a year after purifying himself to become our go-between. Jesus Christ became that permanent high priest. He became the high priest that took the place of all of the other high priests, one that would be our eternal high priest, the go-between between us and God. He became that, but then he also turned around and tore the curtain that separates us from God from top to bottom. How could he do that? Because he became the fulfillment of that promise. He became the one who would take the place of all sacrifices. And he became the perfect substitute for our sins. And because of that, we are able to approach the throne of God with confidence, as we've been speaking about in days past. But here in verse 19, he says, "We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure." You may recognize that as a song that we often have sung before. We have an anchor that keeps us whole. That's Jesus Christ. That anchor is secure. We don't have to worry about it. The ships in the day would use the anchors to hold them against a storm. The storm would hit them out at sea, and they would drop their anchor, and they would allow the storm to push them, to keep them straight, so that they were not tossed and overturned. Because of the way the anchor held them, they were able to face the wind and stay in a secure location until the storm had passed. That anchor holding was very important. If it broke loose, they would be tossed by the wind, and they would be driven into land, to rocks. We see a similar story with Paul. Paul, when he was on the ship that was doomed to be destroyed, and they cut the anchors and they let the ship go towards the island, that anchor that would normally hold them was let go. God is our anchor. Jesus Christ is our anchor. He is the one that keeps us firm and keeps us from being tossed to and fro. And here the example is given that he enters that sanctuary behind the curtain. And he, in verse 20 says, "Where Jesus, who went before us, has entered on our behalf, he has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek." So where is our hope? Where is our assurance, our security? It's all in Jesus Christ. He is the one. Upon his name, we have this promise. The promise that was even greater, the promise made to Abraham. It was a promise made when Jesus Christ came, lived, died, and gave us an opportunity to be one with God. That security, that promise, no one can take away. It's a promise that God intends to keep. The promise that he has given is that we have assurance in him. No one can take that promise away. That's the beautiful part of the promise of that God set apart those who choose to follow him, that he prepared for us a place in heaven, that he is guaranteeing us that he is with us through all things, all trials, all tribulations. Everything that we face on this earth, he will always be with us. The secure part of our existence with God is that he has provided for us all of the things that we need. Does that mean that we get everything we want, or that we will have all of the luxuries or the securities of a worldly standpoint? Not at all. He's not speaking of the worldly securities. He's speaking of a heavenly security, one that he's promised for anyone who will put their faith and trust in him, that no one can take that away. It is anchored deep. It is firmly set, and that no matter what the storms of life throw at us, we can put our hope and our trust in the God of all things, the God of the creation, the one who knew from the beginning everything that he had set in place, knew what was going to happen to us. And he planned for all of this so that we could enjoy the security of him, knowing he will always fulfill what he said. In Hebrews chapter 6, the author wants us to know something. He wants us to know that no matter what things come our way, what problems we face, what trials are thrown at us, we can have a hope in Jesus Christ, because he is the high priest that goes before us and pays for all things. The writer of Hebrews, Jesus himself, wants us to know that we have that hope in him. I hope this maybe encourages you and causes you to think about how much God loves and cares for you, how much he desires to have a relationship with you. And that if you're not presently enjoying that security, if you're not presently hanging on to that anchor, there is something better. There is something greater. It's not this world. It's not money. It's not retirement funds. It's not the security of having debts all paid off or whatever else we might think of in this life. No, the security that we are talking about is a security of a heavenly home, the security of salvation, the security of knowing that he has paid the price for us and that he will guarantee our eternity with him if we hold to his teachings, if we hold to his anchor and live a life for him. He promises that. No one can take you out of the hands of God. That's a beautiful guarantee and a beautiful security. I hope you find this to be an encouragement and that you will put your hope and trust in him. If there's something I could do for you, please let me know. Have a wonderful day. May God bless you all.